Welcome to Clinical Lab Chat, part of the MedCore Podcast Network. I'm Chris Wolski, Director of Business Intelligence for CLP, and today we'll be talking about how blood-based biofluid tests are revolutionizing cancer diagnostics. Now, helping us to understand how and why this revolution is occurring is Dr. Courtney Noah, Vice President of Scientific Affairs at BioIVT. Now, as Vice President of Scientific Affairs, Courtney leads client support through a scientist-to-scientist approach and fostering technical innovation. With extensive experience in the life sciences industry, her technical expertise includes liquid biopsy, IVD, cell and gene therapy, ADMET, molecular biology, cellular biology, and microbiology. So pretty much the full menu, I think. Courtney, so welcome to Clinical Lab Chat. Thanks for offering to help us to better understand the ins and outs of blood-based biofluid tests. So,
Chris, thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, great. And I've been looking forward to kind of diving into this all week. So, many cancer tests are extremely invasive. We talked about that in the pre-interview, and they often only occur when symptoms are present. So, you may not know you have cancer until you have some sort of a symptom occurring, and unfortunately, I know a few people recently who that's happened to. So blood-based testing is much less invasive, but what are the overall advantages beyond being less invasive with using a blood-based biofluid test over those traditional cancer testing methods such as PET or spinal taps and things of that sort?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things that I'd like to talk about, but certainly I think as we utilize these more, there's going to be more and more uncovered and more applications that we find for these blood-based assays. I think first is really just around the simplicity. So because it's just that simple blood draw, I think there's a lot more opportunity to continually be testing the patient and get more information. As we think about cancer screening, doing a simple blood draw and just getting that initial indication. Is there something that we should be worried about that maybe we should be then progressing to the next phase of a more invasive test is one. But even for patients who have cancer or on a drug and we're trying to just understand how are they responding to that rather than going back and doing a biopsy or even a much more expensive test such as an imaging test, we can get a lot of information from the blood and really use that to guide further treatments and understand that responsiveness.
Right.
And then there's there's scientific aspects that give us a little bit more information from the blood. You're not just going in at a single point and having that view of the tumor because it's in the blood. Sometimes there's more factors, genetic information that we can kind of glean on how, the heterogeneity of the tumor. And then just the test itself, the aspect of how quickly can we get the answers back versus what may have to go through the pathology lab versus the molecular diagnostic lab, which many of these assays are molecular diagnostic based, much more rapid turnaround time in the order of days versus weeks.
Right. And, I spoke with this a couple of episodes back, I think. It just does seem that blood biopsies, no matter how what you're using it for, how you're using it, or the approach you're taking, it just seems like we're kind of in this renaissance a little bit, if that's the right word, I guess, in terms of blood biomarkers. It just seems like there's more and more that are being discovered all the time, and it just, after not having them available
it seems so
for
simple,
a long time.
right?
Yeah,
it's
so
blood.
simple, and they're just
didn't
exploding.
We know everything about it? Exactly.
Exactly. So that really, it does seem like we're really at this kind of inflection point now with a new era of blood-based
yes, definitely.
biopsies, etc. So certainly earlier disease detection, faster turnaround times, etc. I think you talked a little bit about expense. So let's talk a little bit about some of these impacts that we're getting both for the patient, the provider, and even the labs. Our primary listeners are laboratorians and lab managers, but it does these benefits cut across the board, right?
Yep, I think there's a lot to benefit from, like you're saying, across these different groups. So certainly for the patient, I think the more information they can have, hopefully peace of mind, but also, the sooner they know about something, the sooner they can go and be treated and get on the right path. And we know, outcomes in patients are much better the earlier a cancer is detected. And certainly, that plays into how the physician will treat them. And I think really giving a lot more information to physicians, again, going back to what I was saying, the ability to just go back and do more regular blood testing, which is not such, a tough ask of a patient versus going in
Yeah.
for a biopsy. They're more likely to look at that and have the patient go in for that blood test and understand what's happening and get a better view. And then I think from the lab perspective, certainly these tests I think have an ability to be more high throughput, and so really
Mm,
for the lab to do run a lot more testing, and then really the impact that they're having on the patients, being able to give more answers back. I think some of the pathology labs, we know that they are facing backlogs, and
right.
that time delay means delay in what we're going to do and how we're going to treat that patient.
Right. Right. And access too. I mean, it's a heck of a lot easier to do a venous blood draw than it is to get somebody in for
Exactly.
a PET test.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's really an important point. I think, if we were to talk about, the patients that need these tests the most, and making sure that the tests are matching the patient demographic, um, can this just be done at a clinic or, a general physician's office? Certainly much easier than having to go into, a hospital type setting and
Right.
have a biopsy done.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about BioIVD, who you work for. Another biospecimen provider that supports diagnostic companies developing liquid biopsy assays. So, from your perspective, what are some of the critical factors in developing an efficacious blood-based biofluid test?
Yeah, so as a biospecimen provider, we've been working with a number of the diagnostic development companies very early on. This is not just something recently. There's been a lot of work and many years of research that's gone on, and I think early on in working with those companies, it became clear that at the very start, when you're doing that blood draw, it's really important to understand all the different factors across that collection that could impact the analyte that you're looking at. So if
Right.
you're looking at circulating tumor DNA, the time frame of collection, the collection tube, many different factors, the anticoagulant that you're using, the spin speeds, all of that was really important to optimize. And we worked very closely with a number of developers early on as they were doing that, and understand the influence of that and how they were picking up those molecular markers, because they're in very low quantities and very sensitive to a number of different
Right.
external factors. So really standardizing and optimizing was critical.
Right, right. And so let's dig a little deeper then with into blood-based biofluid testing. How does that fit into lab menus? We talked about turnaround time and helping with some of those backlogs. So how does this fit in with lab menus, and is this something that can be integrated fairly simply into a workflow? Is there something we have to buy new equipment? We have to think about workflows in a much different way. We have to get more automation. We have to get more people. How does it all work?
Right. I think as these become more routinely used, certainly there'll be a look to see how can we continue to scale this. And so maybe that would be something newer to look at. But in terms of the technologies being used, I think it's very common within those molecular diagnostic labs today. Often being run qPCR or next gen sequencing assays that are used today, various panels. And so it's pretty quick and easy to integrate. As we talk maybe a little bit about the future, I think there's newer technologies that may kind of evolve and require different equipment or adaptation within the clinical lab space.
So you're not going to have to you don't have to really rethink your whole your whole approach to how you handle these
Yeah.
tests.
So for the most part, I mean, it's there's a lot of different types of liquid biopsy assays out there, but I think the most common ones that we're seeing really advance in the market are based on that next gen sequencing or qPCR, which are pretty commonly run in the clinical labs today. So for
Right.
the early stage where we're at right now, it's very
Right.
adaptable.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the economic. We talked a little bit. You kind of touched on this a little bit a few minutes ago. Let's talk about the economic case for these tests. What is the economic case for these tests?
Yeah, and certainly, the developers out there are trying to make this case because there is a cost with the test that's being performed. I mean, if you were to compare it to a biopsy, certainly much less expensive. But if we're talking about incorporating it into more regular, annual exams and screening in that way, it does become a financial cost. But I think the view that you need to look at is down the line, and that's really what's the cost of detecting cancers at later stages. And there's been estimates saying that to incorporate more early cancer diagnostics and screening and catching them at earlier stages could result in $26 billion of savings. So I think for that the healthcare industry, the patients, the whole population, really, that's a significant benefit. And hopefully, from the patients who are saving costs should they get diagnosed with cancer at an earlier stage versus having those much more costly long-term treatments.
Right. And now, is there any sort of this is something occasionally I'll talk with my own physician about, I go in for a checkup and we talk about different kinds of tests and they'll bring up something that's maybe a little bit more involved occasionally. And I'll say, well, why can't we just do a blood test? Or I've read it, I've talked to someone like yourself and they say, well, we have these blood biomarkers. It's great. And he says, yeah, those exist, but the problem is that they don't have the sensitivity sometimes that they need. So is there a trade-off we have with some of this? I mean, in terms of specificity and sensitivity?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's an ongoing. There's many large scale trials that are going on right now, and really trying to reduce that false negative, and even false
Right.
positive, right? Because we don't
Right.
want people being concerned that they think they have cancer when there's been a incorrect analysis there. I think the technology is getting better and better, and like I said, I think we're understanding more and more of those critical factors that influence the detection. And so the more that we get a handle on those, the better that sensitivity and accuracy will become.
Okay. And then we talked about accessibility. Now certainly simplicity for the patient, for the physician as well, and even for the lab makes it more accessible. I mean, if you can integrate these into your workflow as opposed to now we have to buy another new machine that we don't have a footprint for or the budget for, and all the other maintenance, etc. that involve with that. If this is something you could just implement to your workflow, it certainly
Yes.
makes it a lot more accessible for everybody. Not
Yeah.
just which also is a payoff for the you talk about savings, but also labs and physicians' offices and such are also need to be able to generate a certain income in a way
Yeah.
that's not ruinous as well. You have $1 million piece of equipment that costs you 1.5 million to run. That gets tough to make an economic case for this. And it seems like this is at least for the most part
I would say very adaptable.
more
Yeah.
adaptable. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is that does this also accessibility not only is in terms of the time factor, but in areas that, and I've talked about this in other shows, that areas of our country, there are areas of our country that they don't have the physicians, they don't have the expertise, they don't have
Exactly. Some people have to drive, many miles over an hour to, get to a hospital facility versus could they go to their local drugs, a CVS that could do a blood
Right,
draw or their doc, their local town
right.
doctor. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a lot of the discussions in the liquid biopsy space are really about, um, ensuring that we we are treating the patients who do need this and we're getting the maybe some of those underrepresented populations and targeting them because as certainly as we look at cancer rates they are being
Yeah,
very much affected because they're not their tumor biopsy testing is not as accessible to them and it's a
right.
much bigger hurdle.
Right, and you look at it, you look at some of the studies they've done, and unsurprisingly, the places that have the highest cancer rates are the
Hmm.
places that certainly don't have the access or economic resources.
Yeah, the healthcare
Resources, yeah,
infrastructure I think is
yeah,
critical. Yes, yes.
absolutely, absolutely. All right, so we've talked about the here and now, and we've touched a little bit on the future. So, for you, what does the next 5 to 10 years look like for blood-based biofluid testing?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that I kind of see coming in the future. Right now, we're talking about blood, but as a biospecimen provider, we look at a lot of
Sure.
different matrices that researchers are using, and so I think looking at those other biospecimens that are non-invasive, so whether that's saliva or urine, I think that's something that we'll start to see. There's biomarkers in there that can be utilized, and that may be the next wave of looking at those specimen types to detect various cancers or even other disease indications. I think also, we've been talking more about molecular targets, so DNA and RNA that's detected in the blood, but
Hmm.
there's other um, evidence that proteins, so proteomics work, or even microRNAs versus circulating tumor DNA. So I think as the field progresses for ctDNA, which is really the primary analyte right now being used in liquid biopsies, there'll be other analytes that scientists start to branch out to
Yeah.
into, and maybe more. We were talking about sensitivity and accuracy. They may bring more of that into this field.
Right.
Um, and then I think just ways in which we can improve that collection, like I was saying, really ways to enhance that detection. So how can we better stabilize these analytes? There's you know technologies in the space that are looking at this. Can we put different binding agents to make that DNA stay longer within the blood and again be better able to pick that up on our instrumentation? So
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like that renaissance that we were talking about is it's going to continue.
exactly. I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of money going into the space
Yeah.
and really exciting things that are
Yeah.
happening as they're advancing the technology.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. All right. Well, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time. And Courtney, thanks for leading us through what I think is really exciting development in cancer screening. As we talked to maybe a new renaissance in cancer screening. I also want to thank you, the laboratory audience, for listening. Look for more episodes of Clinical Lab Chat in the future and visit us online at clpmag.com and on all of the major social media platforms. So until next time, be well.